Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Toast. And throughout 2024, there's been a conversation about the game industry and whether or not it's going through a modern day crash, we'll kind of say. Now, maybe not quite necessarily to the extent of what happened back during the 80s, but there are a lot of dominoes falling right now. And if anything else, I think we can definitively say that the game industry does, in fact, have a problem. Even Epic Games chimed in with their own opinion today, and I think this is really an eye-opening statement from a big-time publisher. So, this is not necessarily an enthusiastic conversation, but it is something that I think that we need to talk about because I think a lot of us have kind of been feeling its impact. There's just a lot of frustration from gamers right now, and I'll give you my own perspective on the entire situation. As always, though, we do have a lot to get into, so let's just go and jump right into our first topic, starting off with Metal Gear Solid Delta. This right now is probably one of my more anticipated games. I'm a big fan of the Metal Gear Solid series, and it seems like Delta is shaping up extremely well. I've been very impressed by what they've shown so far, and I'm legitimately excited to see a whole new generation of gamers enjoy just how special this game truly is. But it appears we will have to wait a little bit longer. Konami is now apologizing to fans for a lack of a release date. They told us that they don't want to make promises to fans that they can't keep, but they are still working hard on the game, and they told us to please wait a little bit longer. So, by all means here, this is not going to be a 2024 game as we originally hoped for. And to be fair, this isn't Konami's fault. They've not one time suggested that it will be a 2024 game. In fact, going into 2024, most of us were not expecting it for this year, or at least until Sony put out a sizzle reel trailer to hype up their 2024 lineup, which apparently included Metal Gear Solid Delta. So Sony was actually the one that raised those expectations and not Konami. Either way, it does look like a 2025 release is much more likely, and if anything, I do hope it's sooner in the year rather than later, just because, again, I am very much looking forward to Metal Gear Solid Delta. Now, we also got an update from one of this year's most successful games, being Palworld. Of course, it was a phenomenon when it released early in the year for PC and Xbox, and then it just released on PlayStation a week or so back. However, Pocket Pair isn't done quite yet because they just reached an agreement with Krafton to port it over to mobile devices. Now, we don't know if this will be the exact same version as we have on PC and consoles, but Krafton did mention that they quote-unquote plan to faithfully reinterpret and implement the original's main fun elements to fit the mobile environment. Now, the way that kind of reads, it does kind of sound like it will be a different version, but yeah, Palworld continues to be a major player, and I think that also kind of speaks to why Nintendo decided to step in with their own lawsuit. Whether they actually have any merit or not, they do see Palworld as a legitimate threat, despite it being a very, very different game. Okay, so let's go and get to the big topic here, because I feel like our other topics kind of leans in to what we're about ready to discuss, and that's the health of the game industry. I think it's safe to say it's been a rough year for gaming. And while I think there has been some occasional highlights, there's been some good games that I've really enjoyed this year, but it does seem fairly obvious that the game industry isn't exactly where it should be. There's a lot of people that are losing their jobs right now. Studios are closing down, and it just kind of feels like the game industry is on the verge of collapsing because of its just countless mistakes. And this isn't for every single studio. This is mostly about the bigger publishers that have more or less jettisoned what gamers are actually asking for. And that's the thing for me. I've been gaming since the 90s, so I've gone through its ebbs and flows. And there's a lot of things that really bothers me about how some of these bigger companies approach games. I think there's just so much disconnect with gamers and creators right now. I remember a time when gaming was meant to entertain us, first and foremost. And it was run by people who are actually passionate about their creations. It wasn't only about money for them. Sure, yeah, that played a part, but it was also an art for their creation. Yet now that the game industry has grown into this big-time business, something that we've kind of seen is that suddenly it's run by all these bean counters that focuses more on this infinite amount of growth and profit that's just simply not there. And then you have these other creators that are more focused on preaching to us. It's kind of like we're telling them what we want. But it falls on deaf ears because they care more about telling us what they want. Because they're either too focused on maximizing their money growth by taking advantage of us, or they're just more focused on preaching to us. It just kind of seems to be one of the two anymore. And then it's almost like they become confused when their stuff doesn't sell well. I mean, take Ubisoft as one such example. I mean, we are actually witnessing a staple publisher absolutely implode before our very eyes because of their own poor decision-making. They just released Star Wars Outlaws, and given how popular the Star Wars IP is, and even though Disney has kind of done a number on that series on their own, you would still think that it should be a major success. Ubisoft had an opportunity to create an open-world Star Wars game, and that's something that fans have dreamed about for a very, very long time. All Ubisoft had to do is to simply listen to Star Wars fans and to execute. This should have been a huge success for them. Yet we got a character that people didn't ask for in a bug-infested, incomplete game because it was built on the idea that expansions could make them even more money in the long run. So gamers told them no, and it only sold 1 million units for its first month. And yeah, 1 million used to be considered a big-time success, but not for modern AAA games given their insanely high budgets. And that's one of the big things here. The fact that it takes most AAA games anymore 5+ years to develop and hundreds of millions of dollars to develop. 1 million isn't even close to a success anymore. And that right there is the number one core issue. These budgets are just unsustainable. And that's something that the Epic Games CEO touched upon today. He said that the game industry is going through a quote-unquote generational change, and that a lot of games are released with high budgets, and they're not selling. I mean, I'm honestly surprised that the game industry is surprised by what's happening. If a game has to sell 5+ million units to just break even, does that not tell you something? That kind of seems like a bad plan. I mean, do these companies really want to sell 6 million units for razor-thin profits? That is far, far too much risk. All that really tells me is that these big AAA publishers need to scale things back significantly. Maybe not every game needs to be 20 to 30+ hours long. Maybe not every game needs to have the most perfect graphics in the world. We're kind of beyond the point where these graphics are wowing gamers anyways. The point of diminishing returns is officially here. So maybe, just maybe, gameplay should be the core focus. If you look at somebody like From Software, that's why people love them. They make fun games first and foremost. And they're not just trying to make a game for everybody. Something that a lot of people don't understand is that if you have to make something for everybody, well, guess what? That product ultimately appeases nobody. So FromSoft, they know their core audience, and they've built a successful audience from that. So maybe for these other big-time publishers, start focusing on things that do matter. Just make a good, fun game. If you want to have a story, try to make a good story with interesting characters the gamers actually want to play as. And then, you know what? Gamers will show up. Just listen to what fans have been asking for all along. Stop trying to give us all of this other stuff, and stop trying to gouge us at every possible turn. Stop making incomplete games. Stop rushing out bug-infested messes because it's no longer working. And this also goes for live service games. That's what they're built on, predatory practices. And most of those games, yeah, they fell as well. So I don't know. I understand that I'm kind of all over the place with this topic. So, you know what? I'm just going to kind of move on here. Hopefully, I'm making some sense. But the moral of the story is that I think the state of gaming is definitely in a strange spot. And I think there's a lot of reasons as to why. We can point to predatory practices. We can talk about all the preaching. We can talk about the characters and, you know, just the bug-infested messes and this, that, and the other. There's just so many problems with modern AAA games. The long development times, a lack of innovation, poor execution, just the high budgets. I mean, as somebody who cares about this industry, I genuinely hope these AAA publishers can learn from what we're trying to tell them. And hopefully with all the important franchises that they have that we want, I want to see them bounce back. But I think right now, the game industry needs to kind of dig deep and learn from their mistakes, because the direction they're going in, there's going to be a lot more job losses, and there's going to be a lot more studio closures. Now, speaking of long development times, though, that does lead us over to our final topic. The Baldur's Gate 3 developer, Larian Studios, confirmed that it will be a long time before we play their next game. Their current expectation is 2028 or 2029. So this will be yet another game in development for about 5 to 6 years. Now, I mean, this is just kind of the new norm by this point, and as we just talked about a moment ago, it is incredibly risky. In this case, though, I will say that Larian is coming off of a generational type of game. Baldur's Gate 3 is viewed as one of the greatest RPGs of all time, and for a very good reason. So their reputation will likely translate to a lot of hype and success. They built their reputation off of actually making good games, so of course, as long as it turns out to be good, which I do have confidence in Larian Studios, I think this will be perfectly fine for them. Not only was Baldur's Gate 3 exceptional, but so too was Divinity Original Sin. I mean, you can even argue that it's just as good. So I think there's a good reason to be hopeful for their next game. Just kind of know, yes, it will be a long wait. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. But as always, do hit that subscribe button. And until next time, peace out.